Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the new Accuphase E280 integrated amp. Well, new to us. It's been out for a while. I think it's been out for maybe a couple of years. This is their the first integrated amp in the lineup. We received a bunch of Accuphases about a week or so ago, week and a half ago. Allison will put the link of the video in the description box. Anyway, the reason I wanted to talk about this is because this was actually the integrated amp that made me want to pick up the line. I had heard it in a client's house and I thought it sounded really, really good together with a system, and I thought, let me pursue Accuphase. And so when the distributor, who's a friend of ours, came to talk to us about it 2 years ago, we asked for some samples, and then for various reasons we didn't pick up the product, and then about a few months ago started happening again, and we said yes, and so anyway, that's the story. The E280 is, let's see, 90 watts per channel into 8 ohms, 120 watts into 4 ohms. It's $7,999, 8,000 Canadian dollars. I'm not sure what it is in the US. It's a pure analog integrated amp. There are optional slots in the back where you can buy optional cards like PhonoStage or the DAC, but we didn't order that. I will. I just for some reason didn't. Anyway, so the one that we have doesn't have those options. At some later date, I will give further remarks once we get the optional DAC and the PhonoStage. The system that I used to audition this unit includes the Lumen U2 Mini, which is used as a streamer, the digital output into the AudioByte Hydrovox DAC with the ZAP power supply, and then balanced output from there into the Accuphase E280 integrated amp, and the speakers I used were the Sonus Faber Olympic and Nova 3 speakers. Okay, let's start with good. Physically, there's a lot of really good useful features. Great remote. I love how the contrast between the color of the unit and the text is so clear, so easy to read. The feel of the volume control, the switches, just absolute top notch. When you turn the volume control, it feels good. It feels rich. It feels substantial, but also very smooth. It doesn't feel too light. It doesn't feel too heavy. It's just almost perfect. More than enough inputs on the back, although I would prefer more than just the one balanced input. Sonically, let me start with the mid-range. Why the mid-range? Back when I was just starting my journey in the audiophile world, my mentor at the time said something very interesting. He says, mid-range above all else. And then he elaborated. He said, if you get the mid-range wrong, it doesn't matter if the bass is great, doesn't matter if the high frequencies is right, everything will sound wrong. And that's because the mid-range covers the vast majority of the audio range. Most people will say the mid-range covers between 250 hertz to about 3-4 kilohertz. That's about 10 octaves. That's a really wide range. So if you get this wrong, then everything's all screwed up. So I'll tell you a story very quickly. I may have told it in the past, but I'll just tell it to you now. Many years ago at the summer CES, two of my friends and I went down to Chicago to listen to go visit the show. And in one of the rooms, they were introducing this top-of-the-line, incredibly expensive, really stunning-looking horn speaker. And it was, if I remember, about $30,000 or $40,000. And I was this young, very excited kid, had read about it, and I couldn't wait to hear it. They played this opera singer, and I instantly knew it sounded wrong. I'm not going to name the manufacturer, I'm not going to throw them under the bus. But my two friends, after the demo, we both walked out and they both said, that sounded horrible. And I turned to them and I said, why? And they said, it sounded like this, it sounded very honky, and it doesn't sound like the singer. Now, this is kind of interesting because my one friend had just gone to see the singer 2 weeks before in a small intimate concert. And so he knew what she sounded like and definitely didn't sound like her. I didn't know that since I hadn't heard her live, but I knew instinctively that it didn't sound right. Now, was the bass good? Bass was way better than good. I mean, it shook the floors, it shook the room. It was incredibly impressive. Dynamics were off the charts. It went from very soft to very loud, and the speed and the transient response was unbelievable, as you would expect from a horn. Now, keep in mind, I was a relative neophyte at the time. I didn't know all these things, but all I knew was there was something very wrong with the mid-range. I was to later discover that I, as a general rule, have not heard a horn speaker that I like. I can appreciate a lot of the strengths that the horns do, but that honk bothers me. So that's the reason why mid-range above all else. So how does that apply to the Accuphase? Well, the Accuphase's strength is in fact in the mid-range. For those of you who saw my E5000 Accuphase integrated amp review, I talked about the energy, the spiritedness, the freneticism that the E5000 has. Well, the E280 has very, very much the same kind of qualities. It just compels you, it draws you into the music almost better than anything I can think of in terms of other integrated amplifiers. Intense, I wrote this word down. The first card that I played, I'll mention a few, was Yo-Yo Ma playing Ennio Morricone, Gabriel's Oboe. Now this was an album that was released in 2004, and the maestro himself, Ennio Morricone, conducted, orchestrated, and produced the album. Yo-Yo Ma's playing his cello, and by the way, his cello is a 1712 Stradivari, very cool. And the orchestra is the Roma Sinfonietta Orchestra. When he plays the cello, the trademark delicacy and beauty of his fingering, the touch, the light touches as when it's called for is so glorious. You can hear it instantly. And then when the oboe comes in, a lot of times, if you haven't heard this album, listen to it. A lot of times when the oboe comes in, there are certain parts where both instruments are playing the same notes. And right in the lower mid-range, it's very dense, and it's sometimes hard to pick out the two instruments. With the Accuphase, not a problem. You can hear it. It's still very dense, but you can hear the different textures of the different instruments very clearly. I was very impressed by how beautifully it portrayed this particular piece of music. In fact, I got goosebumps listening to it, and for a person who has no hair, this is saying a lot. The other cut that I want to mention is Eva Cassidy singing What a Wonderful World. Back around the, I want to say, very early 2000s, I was in a bookstore called Indigo, which is was very close to my store at the time. And as usual, I'm going through all the different books, buying some stuff I love to read. And suddenly, over the ceiling speakers, I heard this glorious angelic voice. I didn't recognize the song. All I knew was I heard this voice, and I immediately went to the cash register and asked, who's playing? And she pointed to the CD that's sitting in a CD holder, and it says Eva Cassidy. Never heard of her. I immediately bought every title that she had available, and then I went to Amazon and I bought a few more. It turns out, of course, this gorgeous, beautiful voice is responsible for some of the most wonderful music I've had the pleasure of listening to. It's also very sad that she died at the age of 33 before I discovered her. Anyway, I played it for all my clients at the time, and everybody fell in love with her voice. Anyway, she sang the song, What a Wonderful World. Now, many of you will know that the original was done by Louis Armstrong back in 1967. And for many, Louis' version is still the gold standard. And for me, in many cases as well. But Eva Cassidy's interpretation is so good that I don't find it in any way a poor rendition. It's so good. The way she's able to articulate, Her inflections are just absolutely wonderful. Have a listen to her singing through the Accuphase and see if you agree. Yeah, I was also saying about her expressiveness. It comes through so well with the Accuphase. Now in a later video, I'll do some comparisons for you. When I listened to the Accuphase, I did do some comparisons as well. I won't go into those details. I'll just say that the ability of the Accuphase to portray her expression and her spiritedness, her articulation, is almost incomparable. That's how good it is. Now, what about the bass? For upper bass on up, spectacular. Tons of power, speed, clarity, detail, it's all there. I don't find anything missing, certainly not in this price range. I was playing from soft volumes to very loud volumes. Nova 3 easily handled all that I asked for it to do with no difficulty whatsoever. One example would be Kemo Lean On Me. I wrote down here, superb driving bass, propulsive, deep, stunning, micro and macro dynamics. So check that out and see if you agree. Then details, detail retrieval. There are times where when you listen to something that's very, very good, for example, in detail, it might sound harsh, or if something is really smooth and relaxed, it might be missing detail. In the case of the Accuphase, it just seemed to walk this beautiful fine line. I could hear details very easily without paying attention. I didn't find that it was spotlighting on any particular frequency. Here's an example. Tom Waits, Picture in a Frame. Tom Waits is one of my favorite artists. I've enjoyed him ever since I discovered his music many, many, many years ago. He's got this trademark gravelly voice that I really, really enjoy. And he's also this incredible songwriter. So in this particular case, right at the very beginning, you hear him sit on the piano bench. You hear all these noises that typically in a recording would all be edited and cut out, but it's left in, so it sounds more real. And then he starts playing an upright piano. And you'll notice that it almost sounds like the piano is slightly mistuned, almost like a honky-tonk piano, a tricordial almost. You have a fundamental and you have a string that's slightly sharp and slightly flat. Not in this case, it's just a regular good upright piano. It just sounds like it's slightly off tune. And then when the bass comes in, it harmonizes so beautifully and it supports his melody and his voice so well. You can hear all these kinds of separations and details without any difficulty, without any magnification, nor does it sound weird or too much of a good thing. Another one example, Away in the Manger, A Classical Christmas with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. I decided to play this because, well, it's almost February, but for some reason I wanted to hear this particular cut. It's a choir with the Royal Philharmonic supporting it. So right at the beginning, you have the sopranos on the right-hand side singing, and then the rest of the choir join in. And when they join in, you can still clearly hear the altos, the bass, the baritones, the tenors. All the different parts are still very clearly heard, but then when they sing as one voice, it comes together. This is something that the Accuphase did so beautifully well. All right, so soundstage and image. Basically as good as anything I've heard in this price range. Can honestly say, having done some comparisons already, it doesn't give anything up to any of its competition. It's wide when the recording is wide, it's deep when the recording is deep, it has great layers. When the recording is mediocre, then it shrinks between the speakers. Otherwise, it's as wide as I can think of or have experienced. Try Yellow's Kiss the Cloud, or Madonna's Strike the Pose in Q Sound, or even Away in the Manger that I just talked about. Depth, separation, and detachment from the speakers is just wonderful. All right, let's talk about some bad. It doesn't include the DAC or the phono stage for $7,999 or 8,000 Canadian. Some of its competition does. The DAC is $16.99 extra, the phono is $11.99 extra. The meters are not as clear as I would like the meters to be. I mean, if you're going to have a meter, I would prefer it so that you can see the action better. And somehow, I guess the colors that they chose, the more of a champagne yellow hue, just doesn't come across as strong. The highs are probably the one area that I would pick at a bit. Now, I hasten to say, I'm not entirely sure it's the unit's fault. It could certainly be cable matching. It could certainly also be that the amp may need and want a little bit more break-in. I think we've got about 150 hours now, maybe a bit more, but it could certainly need more. It could certainly want more. I'll find out a bit later. What I mean by the highs is that I don't find it quite as airy, quite as ambient, quite as ethereal as the others I've compared it with. Just sounds a little bit closed in. Now, it doesn't sound dull. It doesn't sound shut in. It doesn't sound like a cotton wool in front of a tweeter. It just doesn't sound anything like that. It just doesn't sound quite as sparkly as the others that do. I was listening to Andre Previn doing Rachmaninoff Symphony No. 2 in E minor on the Telarc label. And the shimmer from the violins is just a little bit closed in, just a little bit dull. You know, again, dull is probably the wrong word, but anyway, that was one thing. Deep bass, and I mean from maybe 40 hertz and below, not quite as tight and controlled. Again, in comparison with some of the competition. It just wasn't quite as controlled and articulate, but again, I'm splitting hairs, if you will. I would by no means be unhappy with the way it performed. I'm just talking about how it compares. Ugly, nothing I could think of. Maybe price, you know, for a lot of people, $8,000 is a huge amount of money, and it is. But for what it's worth, I couldn't think of anything that was particularly ugly. All right, conclusion. The Accuphase E280 completely satisfied and reinforced my first listening. When I first heard it all those years ago, two years ago or so, it so impressed me. And now, even more so now that I've spent quite a bit of time with it. It is superbly built, a joy to use, stunning in its sound quality, and I would easily, if I were starting my hi-fi journey today and I had this budget, I would not hesitate to put this on the short list and make sure that I listened to it before I bought anything else. It's really that good. And then from my perspective, having had the great fortune of listening to so many great, wonderful products, this is easily as good as anything I've heard anywhere near its price. So my strongest recommendation to anybody looking for an integrated amplifier in this price. All right, thanks for watching. I would love to read your comments. If you've owned Accuphase, if you've heard the Accuphase, please put your comments below. Let me know what you think, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.